There is a truth that is rarely spoken out loud, but that all of us have felt at some point, the feeling of being less capable, less valuable, less interesting, that inner voice that compares you to others and convinces you that you will never measure up. It can appear in a work setting, when you look at a colleague who seems more confident. It can arise in your social circle, when you see others achieving what you are still pursuing. Or even in silence, in front of the mirror, when the comparison is no longer with others, but with the impossible image of what you think you should be. And the cruelest part of this feeling is that it is rarely noticeable from the outside. To the world you may function well, you complete your tasks, smile in public, appear confident, but inside that voice hides, repeating like a dark mantra, "I'm not enough." That belief infiltrates every corner of your life. It stops you before you act because you fear making mistakes. It locks you in silence because you believe your words carry no weight. It robs you of the joy of your own achievements because there is always someone who seems to have done more. What I want you to understand today is that this feeling is not natural. You were not born feeling inferior. No child enters the world believing they are unworthy. You learned it. You absorbed it at some point. A comparison, a criticism, a rejection, a look of contempt etched into your memory. From there, you began to repeat that narrative until it became a belief. And like every belief, it acts as a filter. You no longer see reality as it is, but through the idea that you are always beneath others. Here's the uncomfortable part. That inferiority you feel does not live in the facts. It lives in your interpretation. Someone may correct you. That is a fact. But when you interpret that correction as proof that you are a failure, the wound multiplies. The same happens when you compare your beginnings with the results of someone who has years of advantage. The facts are simple. He has more experience. But your interpretation is devastating. I will never catch up. That interpretation is what chains you, not the facts. The Stoics knew this. Epictetus repeated it endlessly. We are not harmed by events, but by the opinion we have of them. And yet we live as if external events are what define us. The problem is not in correction, in the success of others, or in criticism. The problem lies in the belief you hold about yourself. That is the root. That is the mother belief. The shock comes when you realize that to a large extent, you are the one feeding that sense of inferiority. It hurts to admit it, but it is liberating. The chain you carry was not only placed by others, but also by you. Every time you repeated, "I'm not enough." Every time you accepted comparison as an absolute truth. If the pain were entirely in the hands of others, there would be no way out. But if part of the suffering comes from your thoughts, then you also have the power to break it. Stoicism did not come to tell you to ignore what hurts, nor to fake a confidence you don't feel. Its proposal is much more radical, to learn to distinguish between what depends on you and what does not, between facts and interpretations, between what you can transform and what you must accept with serenity. Stoic philosophy is, in essence, a manual to reclaim your inner dignity in a world that constantly tries to take it from you. Think about it. How much time have you lost feeling less? How many opportunities have you let slip because you thought you weren't good enough? How many times have you stayed silent in a meeting, even though you had something valuable to contribute? How many times have you looked at your reflection with contempt because you compared your process to someone else's polished showcase? Each one of those times, your mind fed the chain, and every time you do it, the belief of inferiority grows stronger. But here's the good news. What was learned can be unlearned. What was repeated can be replaced. What became a habit can be substituted by a new one. That is the promise of Stoicism, that your life does not have to be governed by the belief that you are less. You can train your mind to recognize that narrative, to challenge it, and to release it. Not in a single day or an instant, but through concrete practices cultivated like a muscle being strengthened. This journey will not be comfortable, because to break the belief of inferiority, you must first dare to face it directly. You must identify the exact phrase you repeat in silence. You must distinguish facts from interpretations. You must learn not to give your assent to every dark thought that crosses your mind. And above all, you must stop measuring your life by someone else's standard and start measuring it by the standard of virtue. That path requires discipline, but it also brings a freedom you may have never experienced. The freedom of feeling that you are enough, not because the world says so, but because you choose it. The script you are about to hear is not a passing motivational speech. It is training, a direct confrontation with that part of you that has turned suffering into a habit. A Stoic guide to breaking the addiction to feeling less and replacing it with the serenity of knowing who you are. Stay until the end, because what comes next are not superficial tips, but 10 Stoic lessons that have withstood centuries and that today can be the hammer that breaks the chain of your inferiority. 10 steps that do not promise to eliminate all pain, but do promise to free you from the most destructive trap, believing you are worth less than others. The moment to break that belief is not tomorrow, nor when the world gives you permission, nor when someone confirms it for you. The moment is now, and it all begins here. First Stoic lesson: identify the mother belief. No one is born feeling less. No child comes into the world convinced they are inferior. That idea is planted later at some point in life. Perhaps it was in childhood when you heard unfair comparisons. Look how your brother succeeds. You should be more like. Maybe it was in adolescence when you didn't fit into a group and began to believe you lacked what was needed. Or maybe in adulthood after a professional failure, a heartbreak, a look of contempt. The exact moment doesn't matter. What matters is that, at some point, a phrase stuck in your mind like a label. A phrase that began repeating until it became your narrative. That is your mother belief. The mother belief works like an invisible seed. Even though you don't see it, it bears fruit in every area of your life. If the phrase is, "I am not enough," that idea will appear every time you face a challenge. If it is, "I always fail," it will trigger before every attempt. If it is, "No one values me," it will influence how you interpret every gesture from others. The mother belief operates silently, but its consequences are loud: fear, comparison, insecurity, self-sabotage. The Stoics knew this. What you constantly think becomes the way you live. Epictetus summed it up like this: "It is not things themselves that disturb us, but the opinions we have about them." That mother belief is not a fact, it is an opinion. But an opinion repeated without being questioned eventually feels like absolute truth. And there lies the danger. You no longer distinguish between what happened and what your mind decided to conclude. Think about this. Someone may have corrected you in public one time. That was a fact. Someone pointed out a mistake. But the mother belief may have turned it into a permanent judgment. "I'm clumsy, I always mess up, I am not good at this." That was not the world's conclusion. It was your mind's interpretation, and by repeating it, you turned it into your personal truth. Here is the first Stoic exercise. Identify precisely what that mother belief is. It is not enough to say, "I feel inferior." You must put it into exact words. Write it down on a piece of paper. Tell your mind, "This is what I believe." It may feel uncomfortable because recognizing it is exposing your own fragility. But at the same time, it is liberating because what is named loses power. What is brought to consciousness stops ruling from the shadows. Marcus Aurelius practiced something similar in his meditations. Every night he wrote what had gone through his mind during the day. He identified emotions, judgments, repeated thoughts. He didn't do it to feed his ego or to seek comfort, but to train his mind, because by writing it down he could observe it from a distance. And when you observe your mother belief from the outside, you realize you are not that belief, you are only holding it. Try it. You might discover that your phrase is, "I am not worthy of love." Maybe it is, I am never enough, or everyone is better than me. Write it down, read it out loud, hear how it sounds when it's no longer in your mind but on paper. Do you notice the difference? It is one thing to feel it as an inner truth, another to see it written and recognize it is only a phrase, only a judgment, only an opinion. The second step is to separate that belief from the facts. Remember Epictetus's example. You are not harmed by events, but by your interpretations. Ask yourself, what concrete facts support this phrase? If you say, I am not enough, what evidence do you have? Or is your mind only selecting memories that confirm that idea? Because the mother belief usually feeds on selective memory. It remembers failures but forgets successes. It remembers criticism but forgets praise. Seneca advised keeping a daily record of practiced virtues, not to boast but to balance the mind, because the soul tends to remember more of what hurts than what strengthens. The mother belief feeds on that tendency, and the only way to counter it is by collecting contrary evidence. Identifying the phrase is the first step. Dismantling it with facts is the second. But before that, you need to face the discomfort. What phrase secretly governs your life? If you don't discover it, you will keep acting on autopilot, responding from that idea every time you face a challenge. Imagine what would happen if you never questioned that belief. A child who is told he is not smart may go through life avoiding academic challenges. A young person who believes they are unattractive may sabotage relationships, convinced they will always be rejected. An adult who thinks they will never be successful may give up on dreams before even trying, not because those outcomes are inevitable, but because the mother belief dictates their decisions. The Stoics proposed a different path. Confront the belief as a judgment, not as a truth. And this is where transformation begins, because the inferiority you feel is not a written destiny, it is a repeated mental habit. And like every habit, it can be broken. In practice, here is your exercise for today. Sit down calmly and write the phrase that hurts you most. Don't deceive yourself with detours, be brutally honest. It may sound like this: I am not enough, I always disappoint, nobody loves me, I am a failure. Write it, read it, observe it as you would observe a cloud. It passes before you, but it is not you. Now ask yourself the Stoic question: is this phrase a fact or an opinion? Is it a universal truth, or is it only a judgment I adopted at some point? When you can see the difference, that belief will begin to lose its power. Freedom begins when you name your jailer. And in this case, your jailer is not the world, nor the people who compared you, nor those who criticized you. Your jailer is that phrase you repeat without questioning, and the first act of rebellion is to identify it. Breaking the feeling of inferiority does not begin with motivational speeches, nor with positive comparisons, nor with external praise. It begins with the courage to look within and say, "This is the belief that is ruling me." Because only those who dare to name their shadow can begin to walk toward the light. Second Stoic lesson: differentiate facts from interpretations. One of the greatest mistakes the human mind makes is confusing what happens with what it thinks about what happens. A fact occurs, someone makes a comment, a person achieves something, you make a mistake in a task. That is reality. But your interpretation can turn it into something much larger. I am a failure. I will never make it. Everyone is better than me. And in that invisible leap between the real and the interpreted lies much of human suffering. Epictetus engraved this in his teaching. It is not things themselves that disturb us, but the opinions we have about them. That phrase is not just a philosophical reflection, it is a practical map. Because if you learn to separate the fact from the interpretation, you stop carrying unnecessary suffering. What hurts is not so much what happened, but what you told yourself about what happened. Let's take an example. Imagine you are in a work meeting and someone corrects an error in your presentation. The fact is clear. There was a mistake and someone pointed it out. Period. But your interpretation can be devastating. I am incompetent. I am not good at this. Everyone thinks I am less. That leap is not in reality. It is in your mind. The same happens in your personal life. Someone doesn't respond to your message. The fact is that there was no reply. The interpretation may be, they ignore me because I am not important. That is the poison. That is the trap that feeds the belief of inferiority. Because facts, in general, are neutral. They are observable, measurable, verifiable. But interpretations are narratives filled with emotions and judgments. And as long as you don't learn to distinguish between the two, you will live trapped in your own stories. The Stoics proposed a radical exercise: rigorously separate the two planes. Seneca spoke of the importance of writing down each day what had actually happened, without embellishments, without unnecessary judgments. What happened versus what I thought happened. Marcus Aurelius did the same in his Meditations. He forced himself to describe reality in a bare way, without adding interpretations. He would say, "A man died," instead of "a tragedy occurred." The difference is enormous. The first is a fact, the second is an interpretation. Now think about your own life. How many times have you confused facts with interpretations? Someone achieved something before you. Fact: that person got a result. Interpretation: I am useless. I will never get there. Someone looked at you in a certain way. Fact: there was a look. Interpretation: they despise me. I am worthless. Someone didn't choose you for a project. Fact: they picked someone else. Interpretation: they never trust me because I am less. The Stoic trains the mind to write these two columns, one for observable facts and another for added interpretations. Because when you place them separately, you discover that inferiority is never in the facts column. It is always in the interpretations column, and that is liberating, because it means that the root of your suffering lies in a plane you can work on. Do the exercise right now. Think of a recent situation that made you feel less. Write it down. Describe only what really happened, what anyone could observe as an external witness. Then write what you thought about it, the conclusions you drew. Do you see the difference? What hurts is not what happened, but the story you built from it. Marcus Aurelius said, if something external afflicts you, the pain is not due to it, but to your opinion about it, and this is something you can erase immediately. That phrase is a constant reminder. You have more control than you think, not over what happens outside, but over the story you build inside. Here is the crucial point. It is not about denying reality or painting it over with empty optimism. It is about training yourself to see things as they are, without adding unnecessary judgments. A criticism is a criticism, not a sentence of inferiority. A failure is an outcome different from the one expected, not proof that you are useless. A comparison is only a contrast, not a measure of your worth. Stoic practice consists in stopping each time your mind wants to leap from fact to interpretation. Ask yourself 3 simple questions. 1. What really happened? 2. What am I interpreting about what happened? 3. Is my interpretation an absolute truth or just an opinion? That filter is enough to begin dismantling the belief of inferiority. Because what you call reality is often nothing more than unexamined interpretation. Imagine the difference this would make in your life. Instead of saying, I was corrected, I am a failure, you would say, I was corrected, I made a mistake. And that changes everything, because a mistake can be corrected. A permanent failure is an invented sentence. Instead of thinking, I was rejected, I will never be loved, you could say, I was rejected this time. That opens the door to new opportunities, while the first closes it forever. The Stoics were not cold or indifferent as they are sometimes accused of being. They did not deny that facts could hurt. What they rejected was adding unnecessary suffering to what already hurt by itself. And that is a lesson we need today more than ever. Stop adding chains to your own wounds. Inferiority does not live in what happens, but in what you decide to think about what happens. And if you can change your interpretation, you can change your life. So here is your challenge. For the next few days, every time you feel you are less, stop and write the facts in one column and your interpretations in another. Look at them clearly. You will discover that the phrase, "I am inferior," will never appear in the facts column. It only lives in the column of your judgments. And if it lives there, then you have the power to question it, to change it, to let it go. Because as Epictetus said, what is in your power is the opinion you have about things. And that opinion, if trained with discipline, can free you from the belief that chains you. Third Stoic lesson, live the dichotomy of control. One of the most common mistakes that sinks us into the feeling of inferiority is focusing life on what we cannot control. We compare ourselves to the talents of others, to their financial level, to their achievements, to the way the world applauds them. And while we do this, we stop looking at what is actually in our hands, our effort, our discipline, our daily actions. That confusion between what is controllable and what is uncontrollable is what the Stoics called the great trap of the soul. Epictetus stated it with brutal clarity in his Enchiridion, "Of things, some depend on us and others do not." That phrase, seemingly simple, contains one of the most powerful keys to living in peace. Because much of our anxiety, our suffering, and our feeling of inferiority comes from forgetting that distinction. We believe it is within our power to change someone else's opinion, to master another's natural talent, to influence external circumstances that will never be under our control, and by failing to do so, we feel less. Imagine the following scene. You are in a competition or a job evaluation. You prepared your presentation, you gave your best effort, but another candidate gets the recognition. The fact is simple. Someone else was chosen. What is uncontrollable is the judge's decision, others' perceptions, the preferences of those who choose. But what was controllable was your preparation, your clarity, your dedication. If you forget that difference, you fall into the painful conclusion, "I am less because they didn't pick me." But if you remember the dichotomy of control, you can say, "I gave my best in what was in my hands. The rest is not my responsibility." Comparison is almost always born from looking toward what you cannot control. Another person's success, someone else's pace, the natural talent they were born with. There will always be someone faster, more skilled, more experienced. If your worth depends on surpassing them all, you will always lose. But if your worth depends on what is in your sphere of control, your effort, your consistency, your virtue, then no one can take away your sense of dignity. Marcus Aurelius practiced this in his daily life as emperor. He could not control conspiracies against him, betrayals in the Senate, or plagues that ravaged Rome, but he could control his response, remain calm, act with justice, fulfill his duty. This practice did not make him less of an emperor, but wiser. And in his diary, he reflected the teaching. If what hurts is external, remember it does not depend on you. If it depends on you, act. If not, accept. Now, think about your life. How many times have you felt inferior because someone achieved something you have not yet? How many times did you judge yourself harshly because life did not respond as you expected? That feeling of inferiority arises largely from focusing your attention on what is not under your control. The Stoic exercise here is practical. Make a list of your current worries and divide them into 2 columns. In the first, write what is truly in your hands, your actions, your decisions, your habits. In the second, write what does not depend on you, others' opinions, the weather, chance, other people's reactions. You will realize that most of your fears and your feeling of inferiority live in the second column, and by recognizing it, you have the option to let go of that useless weight. The problem is that we were taught to measure ourselves by what is outside our control, external applause, grades, comparisons. But the Stoics changed the metric. Don't ask yourself if you are better than others. Ask yourself if you are being better at what depends on you. Did you put in effort? Were you disciplined? Did you act with integrity? If the answer is yes, then you have won, even if you don't have a trophy to prove it. The feeling of inferiority loses strength when you return to your sphere of action, because there is no comparison, only practice. The musician may not be the most famous, but if he practiced his instrument with discipline today, he lived in control of himself. The student may not be the brightest, but if he studied with consistency, he mastered what depended on him. The parent may not be perfect, but if he was present and acted with love, he fulfilled his role. That is the serenity Stoicism proposes, to rest in what you can actually do. And here's an important detail. Focusing on your sphere of control does not mean being conformist. It is not about surrendering to whatever fate brings. On the contrary, it means directing all your energy toward what can truly transform your life. Because if you spend your strength on the uncontrollable, you exhaust yourself with no results. But if you concentrate your energy on what is controllable, you advance, slowly but firmly. The feeling of inferiority is a silent thief. It feeds every time you put your attention on someone else's ground, but it weakens every time you return to yourself, to your effort, to your virtue. And best of all, no one can prevent you from returning there, because your will, your thoughts, and your actions are a sacred space that belongs entirely to you. In practice, every time you compare yourself to someone else, pause and ask, what part of this comparison depends on me? If you see someone more successful, acknowledge that their talent and their path are theirs, but your effort and your discipline are yours. If someone receives praise you don't, remember that external opinion doesn't depend on you, but your commitment to what you do does. That short pause is enough to take oxygen away from the belief of inferiority. The dichotomy of control is more than an idea, it is a tool of freedom. Because when you learn to live by that distinction, you stop being a slave to chance, to opinions and to comparisons. And you begin to live as the owner of your life, measuring your worth not by what happens outside, but by what you choose inside. Remember this, you do not control others' talent, luck, or applause, but you control your effort, your attitude, and your conduct. And when you choose to live from that place, you are no longer inferior to anyone, because no one can take away what depends on you. Fourth Stoic lesson, train the discipline of assent. The human mind is like a public square. Thoughts are constantly entering and leaving, some pleasant, others destructive. You have no control over which ones arrive, but you do have control over which ones remain. That is the core of what the Stoics called the discipline of assent. A thought knocks at the door. You are worthless. You are less than others. You will always fail. You decide whether to open the door and let it settle in, or to recognize it as a lie and dismiss it before it takes root. Epictetus, who understood the workings of the soul well, explained it with clarity. It is not things themselves that disturb us, but the opinions we have about them. But there is a deeper layer. Not every opinion deserves your yes. Not every thought that appears must receive your assent. The mistake lies in believing that every inner voice is true, in assuming that everything you think defines who you are. Imagine this. You are about to send a proposal at work. An automatic thought appears. They will surely reject it. You are not as good as the others. That thought by itself is just a visitor. It has no power. The problem occurs when you give it assent. When you say, yes, that's true, and act from it. Maybe you don't send the proposal, maybe you send it with insecurity. The result is that the belief in inferiority grows stronger. The discipline of assent is learning to filter, to ask yourself before each thought, is it true? Is it necessary? Is it useful? If the answer is no, then do not give it your consent. It is like a guard at the gate of your mind. Some thoughts pass because they build, others stay out because they destroy. Marcus Aurelius practiced this every day. In his meditations, he wrote down the thoughts that crossed his mind and confronted them with questions. Those that were worthy, he gave his assent. Those that were toxic, he dismantled with reason. He said, "Your mind will take the shape of the thoughts you habitually hold." That phrase is both a warning and a call to discipline. If you constantly repeat, "I am worthless," your mind will be shaped by it. But if you decide not to give assent to that voice, the root of inferiority begins to wither. Now, the discipline of assent does not mean denying that such thoughts appear. On the contrary, it means recognizing them without identifying with them. Think of them as clouds in the sky. You cannot prevent them from passing, but you don't have to chase them or build your house under them. You can simply watch them drift by and continue with your life. A practical exercise is to pause each time a self-destructive phrase appears and say quietly, "It is just a thought, not a fact." That distance severs the automatic link we tend to make. Because what hurts you is not the thought appearing, but you're accepting it as truth without questioning it. The discipline of assent also implies replacement. It is not enough to say, "I don't believe," to the voice that says, "I am less." You must provide your mind with an alternative narrative. Instead of, "I am worthless," repeat, "I am learning." Instead of, "I will never achieve this," say, "I am in process." Your mind obeys the orders you repeat, and just as inferiority was built on repeated phrases, strength can also be built with new ones. The Stoics were aware that the mind tends to dramatize, to create unnecessary opinions. That is why they proposed a rigorous practice, to filter. Seneca expressed it this way, "Man suffers more from his imagination than from reality." If you want to stop feeling inferior, it is not enough to change environments or accumulate external achievements. You must train your mind not to assent to every dark thought that appears. Imagine how your life would change if you applied this discipline. Instead of automatically believing you are incapable, you would pause and question. Instead of feeding fear, you would observe it and let it go. Instead of building your identity on negative voices, you would build it on clearer, more useful judgments. That daily practice is what turns an insecure person into someone serene and self-possessed. A simple example, you go to the gym and see someone stronger than you. The automatic thought may be, "I am weak, I will never reach that level." That thought arrives without your permission, but in that moment you can apply the discipline of assent. Ask yourself, is it true? No, because your strength can improve with training. Is it necessary? No, because it does not help you train. Is it useful? Neither, because it steals your energy. So you do not give it your yes, and you replace it with, "I am progressing every day." That simple filter changes the whole experience. The discipline of assent is not magic, it is training. At first it is hard, because the mind has spent years accustomed to saying yes to every self-critical thought. But with practice, you become more agile. You recognize the dark voice and do not feed it, and little by little, the belief in inferiority loses its strength because you stop casting your vote for it every time it appears. Remember, you do not choose which thoughts arrive, but you do choose which ones you give power to, and there lies your freedom. Inferiority is not a written destiny, it is a mental habit reinforced with each assent. If you learn to deny them your yes, if you learn to filter, you will be taking back control of your mind. The Stoics called this hegemonikon, the ruling principle of the mind. That part of you that decides which thoughts you accept and which you reject. To cultivate the hegemonikon is to train yourself in freedom, because a man who believes every thought that crosses his mind is not free. He is a slave to his mind. But the one who filters and chooses what to believe becomes master of himself. So the next time you hear within you, "You are worthless," remember, it is just a thought. You decide whether to make it your truth or let it pass like any other shadow. And that decision, small as it may seem, is the foundation for breaking the chain of inferiority. Fifth Stoic lesson, collect evidence, not excuses. The human mind has a peculiar ability. It easily remembers what confirms our darkest beliefs and forgets what contradicts them. This is what we call confirmation bias. If deep within you lies the core belief, I am less, your mind will tirelessly search for proof to validate it. It will remember the time you made a mistake in public, but forget the 10 times you acted correctly. It will hold on to every rejection like a scar, but erase the moments when you were accepted and valued. Inferiority feeds on selective memory. The Stoics knew this. Seneca, in his letters, recommended keeping a daily record not only of what hurt, but also of the virtues practiced. Each night he wrote down what he had done well, how he had advanced, and where he had shown integrity. He did not do this to inflate his ego, but to remind himself that life was not only pain and mistakes, but also progress and virtue. That record was, in modern terms, a way of collecting evidence. Imagine your mind as a courtroom. The belief in inferiority acts as a relentless prosecutor who only presents evidence against you. You failed at this. You were rejected at that time. You weren't chosen for that opportunity. And if no defense attorney shows up, the verdict will always be the same: guilty of being less. The problem is that we rarely present evidence in our own favor, and yet that evidence exists. It just needs to be brought to light. The practice this lesson proposes is simple, yet powerful. Collect evidence. Make a conscious inventory of your virtues, your achievements, your acts of courage, no matter how small they may seem. If today you sent that difficult email, write it down. If today you got up despite fatigue and fulfilled your duty, acknowledge it. If today you spoke honestly when it would have been easier to remain silent, celebrate it. Each action is a piece of evidence that contradicts the narrative of inferiority. The mistake is in always seeking excuses instead of evidence. We listen to the voice that says, "You're not capable," and we give up, reinforcing the belief. We think, "I will achieve nothing," and use any stumble as an excuse to stop. But Stoicism teaches the opposite. Seek proof of your capacity, even in the midst of difficulty. Marcus Aurelius wrote in the middle of wars and plagues, reminding himself of the acts of virtue he could still practice: patience, justice, temperance. He did not need excuses to justify his pain. He needed evidence to uphold his integrity. A daily example. Imagine you go to a job interview and you don't get hired. The voice of inferiority will say, "See, you're not good enough." That is the excuse that keeps the belief alive. But if you apply this lesson, you will seek evidence in the fact that you prepared, that you had the courage to show up, that you gained experience through the process. These are proofs that refute the verdict of "I am less." The key lies in training your memory to recall not only what hurts, but also what strengthens you. Write down 3 brave actions you took today, 3 results achieved, however small, 3 virtues you practiced. At first it may feel forced, but little by little you will be building a different mental archive, and that archive will be the antidote to the selective memory that only holds on to excuses. Seneca said, "What gets measured improves. What gets remembered sustains." If you only remember failures, you will sustain the belief that you are less. If you remember virtues and achievements, you will sustain the belief that you are capable. The choice lies in what you decide to collect. This exercise also reveals something important. Most of the time, your acts of virtue are more abundant than your mistakes. You just don't record them. How many times have you been honest when you could have lied? How many times have you gotten up despite being tired? How many times have you helped someone without anyone seeing? These are proofs of your strength, but if you do not acknowledge them, your mind will continue to deliver an unjust verdict. The feeling of inferiority is not fought with empty motivational speeches, but with concrete evidence that dismantles it. Every time your mind says, "You're not enough," present it with 3 counter-evidences. Like a lawyer defending a client, show facts. Yesterday I completed this task. Today I faced this fear. This week I was consistent. And repeat the process until the inner judge can no longer ignore the reality. The discipline of collecting evidence also protects you against comparison, because when you see the achievements of others, the temptation is to think you lack value. But if you keep a record of your own progress, you have proof that you are growing. Maybe not at someone else's pace, but at your own. And that is enough. Remember, inferiority feeds on excuses. It sustains itself with phrases like, "I can't," "I'll never make it," "Others are better." But dignity feeds on evidence, acts, virtues, real progress. What you decide to collect determines what you believe about yourself. So here is your practice. Each night, before bed, write down 3 proofs of your strength, no matter how small they seem. A call made, a step taken, a fear confronted. After a month, you will have an arsenal of evidence that contradicts the voice of inferiority, and that voice, faced with so many facts, will begin to lose its power. Stoicism is not about ignoring reality, but about seeing it with clarity. And the reality is that you have done much more than you remember. You just need to start collecting it. Breaking the belief that you are less does not consist of inventing greatness, but of rigorously recognizing the evidence of your own life. Because if your mind is a courtroom, you deserve a fair trial. And a fair trial includes all the evidence, not just the pieces that confirm your condemnation. 6th Stoic lesson: leave comparison, embrace the standard. One of the deepest sources of the feeling of inferiority is constant comparison. You look in the mirror, and instead of seeing yourself, you see others reflected in your mind. She is more successful. He is more talented. They are advancing faster. And every time you compare, you automatically place yourself on the lower rung, as if your life were an endless ranking in which you are always losing. The problem is not in observing others. The problem lies in using someone else's life as the yardstick by which you measure your own worth. That metric will always leave you in debt, because there will always be someone more skilled, more experienced, more recognized. There will always be a person who achieves something before you or with more ease than you. And if your sense of dignity depends on outdoing them all, then you will never be enough. The Stoics had another way of measuring life. Instead of comparing themselves with others, they compared themselves with themselves. Seneca expressed it clearly. It is not about being better than others, but about being better than your past self. That is the key. Stop chasing an external ranking and start building an internal standard. Imagine a runner competing in a marathon. If his only goal is to finish before everyone else, he will live in frustration, because there will always be athletes who are younger, better trained, or in better physical condition. But if his standard is to beat his own time, then every race will be a victory, even if he crosses the finish line after many. That shift in focus changes the entire experience of life. Now think about your daily life. Perhaps you see a co-worker rising through the ranks faster, and comparison whispers, "I am less." Perhaps you see someone on social media flaunting achievements, travels, or recognition, and you think, "I don't have the same worth." That voice is the trap of comparison. But if you apply the Stoic standard, the question is no longer, "Am I better than them?" but "Am I better than I was yesterday?" And the answer is always under your control. Marcus Aurelius, surrounded by philosophers, generals, politicians, and wise men, could easily have fallen into that trap. But in his meditations he reminded himself that he must live according to virtue, not status. It did not matter if another was more eloquent, stronger, or more applauded. What mattered was whether he himself was being just, courageous, disciplined, and wise. That was his standard, and by measuring his life with that yardstick, he found serenity amid chaos. The problem with comparison is that it steals peace because it places it beyond your reach. You cannot control the talents others were born with, the opportunities they received, the time they have been advancing, but you can control your actions today, your discipline today, your progress today, and if you measure your life by that standard, you no longer need to feel inferior to anyone because your only competition is yourself. Do this exercise. Take a sheet of paper and divide it in two. On one side, write the comparisons you usually make. I'm not as successful as, I don't have as much as, I'm not as smart as. On the other side, write a personal standard you can apply. Was I more consistent than yesterday? Did I act with more integrity than last week? Did I put in more effort than the last time? This simple practice changes your focus immediately. You move from feeling less due to factors you can't control to feeling responsible for what you can. Comparison also creates a dangerous illusion, believing others are perfect. You only see the visible part of their lives, the display case, but not their inner struggles, failures, and insecurities. And you compare yourself to that partial version as if you were competing against a mirage. The result is that you belittle yourself in front of an incomplete image. The personal standard, on the other hand, does not depend on illusions. It is based on facts, on what you really did, on the progress you actually made. Stoicism teaches us that dignity is born from inner progress, not from outer applause. It does not matter if someone else achieves more, because virtue is not measured in quantities, but in consistency. A man who acts with justice, though no one sees it, is greater than one who wins awards for superficial achievements. A woman who faces her fears each day, even without applause, is stronger than one who only pretends confidence. The Stoic standard is intimate, silent, but profoundly liberating. In practice, every time you catch yourself comparing with someone else, ask this question: what can I do today to be a little better than yesterday? That question gives you back your power, because the answer depends solely on you. Perhaps the answer is to read 10 pages of a book, take one step toward a project, practice patience, or speak more honestly. It doesn't matter how small it is, as long as it represents progress under your own standard. The feeling of inferiority dissolves when you understand that life is not a competition with others, but a training with yourself, and that your worth does not depend on your position in an imaginary ranking, but on your faithfulness to your own principles. Remember this: comparison always steals, the standard always builds. Comparison chains you to an external yardstick. The standard gives you back the freedom to choose your measure. Comparison leaves you feeling less. The standard reminds you that you can be more every day, but only compared to yourself. So abandon the race against everyone else and begin the race with yourself. Because there, and only there, you will find the dignity that does not depend on applause or external victories, but on the certainty that today you were a little more honest, a little more disciplined, a little braver than yesterday. Seventh Stoic lesson: practice small daily acts of courage. Inferiority is not broken with grandiose thoughts, but with concrete actions. The mind can repeat 1,000 times, "I am enough." But if your actions do not confirm it, the belief wavers. That is why the Stoics insisted on the value of daily practice, of continuous action, and among all possible actions, there is one that transforms more than any other: courage. Not the epic courage of battles or great heroic gestures, but the silent courage of each day. The feeling of inferiority often paralyzes. It convinces you not to try because you will fail, not to speak because you will be judged, not to expose yourself because you will be rejected. And while you obey that voice, your world becomes smaller. Daily courage is the antidote, a small but challenging act that contradicts the narrative of inferiority and proves through action that you are more capable than you think. Think of an email you keep postponing because you fear the response, of the call you avoid because you are not sure you will be heard, of the no you do not dare to say because you fear disappointing someone. Each of those moments is an opportunity for courage. You do not need to conquer the world, you need to conquer that moment, because every time you choose the courageous act, however small it seems, you are telling your mind, "I am not a slave to fear, I am the master of my decision." Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations that greatness does not consist in speeches, but in the consistency of actions, and that consistency is proven in the ordinary. The emperor who faced wars knew that the hardest courage was not found on the battlefield, but in remaining calm in daily life, in being just when he could be unjust, in keeping temperance when others gave in to anger. Those silent acts were his true strength. Inferiority loses its power when you collect evidence of courage. It is not enough to reflect on it, you must challenge it. And it is challenged with decisions, an uncomfortable step, a controlled risk, a move forward, because the mind is trained with actions, not just with ideas. A practical exercise. Each day when you wake up, choose a small action that represents courage for you. It does not matter if to others it seems insignificant. Perhaps it is speaking up in that meeting where you usually remain silent. Perhaps it is showing up for that opportunity, even though you fear you are not ready. Perhaps it is setting boundaries with someone who usually takes advantage of you. The magnitude does not matter. The intention does, doing something that contradicts the narrative of inferiority. Seneca said that courage is a muscle, and like any muscle, it grows with use. At first, you will lift small weights, an honest word, an action you feared. But with practice, your capacity increases, and what once seemed impossible one day becomes a natural part of you. That is how courage is trained, through constant repetition, not isolated gestures. The danger of inferiority is that it convinces you to wait until you feel ready, to wait until you feel more secure, to wait until the perfect moment arrives. But the perfect moment never comes. The only way to gain confidence is to act before you feel ready. It is action that generates confidence, not the other way around. And each courageous action is proof against the lie that you are less. Imagine a person who believed all their life that they were incapable of speaking in public. Their core belief was, my voice does not matter. But they decide to begin with small acts of courage, giving their opinion in a conversation, raising their hand in a meeting, presenting in a small group. Each step refutes the belief. Over time, that person can speak in front of hundreds, not because they were suddenly born confident, but because they trained their courage in small doses. The practice of small acts of courage also helps you redirect your attention, because when you focus on what you did not do or on what you fear, inferiority grows. But when you focus on what you did, even if it was uncomfortable, your mind changes its narrative. You are no longer the one who always stays silent, but the one who spoke this time. You are no longer the one who always avoids, but the one who acted today. And that difference, however small, changes the identity you hold. Marcus Aurelius insisted that philosophy was not theory, but exercise. And courage is one of the most powerful exercises, because every time you choose courage over comfort, you come closer to inner freedom. You prove to yourself that you are not a slave to the voice that says, you cannot. And that repeated act builds a new belief, that you are capable, that you are enough, that you can face life with dignity. In Stoic practice, courage is not measured by the size of the challenge, but by faithfulness to your principles in small things, telling the truth when it is easier to lie, acting justly even if no one notices, doing what is right even if your voice trembles. These are the acts that train your soul. And in training your soul, the idea that you are inferior weakens. Remember this, inferiority is fed by inaction. Each time you yield to fear, you confirm the lie that you cannot. But each time you act with courage, you contradict it. You do not need a heroic act to break the chain. You need many small acts of courage, one after another, day after day. That sum of acts builds a strong character. So wake up tomorrow with this purpose, to choose one small act of courage. It does not matter what, it does not matter where, it does not matter if no one notices. What matters is that you know it, because every time you do, you write a new story in your mind, a story where you are no longer inferior, but a human being capable of facing life with courage. Eighth, Stoic lesson: reinterpret your past as training. The past is a strange territory. You cannot go back there, but you never stop visiting it with your mind, and those visits can be liberating or devastating depending on how you read what happened. For many, the past is a catalogue of proofs that confirm their supposed inferiority: the failed exam, the relationship that ended badly, the lost job, the wasted opportunity. Each memory becomes evidence sustaining the belief of "I am not enough." And thus, what has already ended continues to hold power over the present. But the Stoics proposed a radically different perspective. For them, the past was not a judge that delivers a sentence, but a teacher that trains. Marcus Aurelius, in the midst of battles, repeated to himself the idea of amor fati, to love what happens, not because it is pleasant, but because it trains you. What has already passed is not under your control, but it is in your power to decide how to interpret it. And that interpretation can sink you into inferiority or propel you toward virtue. Imagine someone who failed in business. If they interpret that failure as proof of "I am useless," they will remain trapped in fear and never try again. But if they interpret what happened as training, as a lesson on what not to repeat, then the same fact becomes a seed of strength. The failure was real, but inferiority is not. That was born of interpretation. Epictetus said it clearly: what matters is not what happens to you, but how you react to it. And that reaction occurs not only in the present moment, but also in the way you remember the past, because each memory is a new reaction. You do not relive the facts, you relive the interpretation you chose to give them, and that choice is always in your hands. Take a moment of memory. Think of a mistake in your life that still weighs on you. Perhaps you said something you should not have. Perhaps you trusted the wrong person. Perhaps you failed at something important. Now look at that memory with Stoic eyes. Ask yourself, was it really proof that I am inferior, or was it training that showed me something I needed to learn? Perhaps it trained you in humility, perhaps in patience, perhaps in resilience. The lesson is there, waiting to be recognized. Inferiority turns every wound into a certificate of incapacity. Stoicism turns every wound into a training ground. The difference is not in the facts, but in the interpretation. And if you can reinterpret, you can transform your past into an ally instead of an enemy. Marcus Aurelius urged acceptance of what fate brings, not with resignation but with gratitude, because even the most painful things can serve to forge character. And the truth is that you can no longer change what happened. The only thing you can change is how you remember it. If you see it as proof of your smallness, you will continue to feel less. If you see it as training, you will become stronger. A practical example: someone was rejected several times in love. If they interpret those rejections as "no one loves me, I am worthless," then each memory will confirm their inferiority. But if they interpret them as training to know themselves better, to learn to set boundaries, to recognize what they truly need, then each rejection becomes a teacher. The fact does not change, but the interpretation does, and that difference changes an entire life. The practice here is as follows. Take 3 memories that still hurt. Write them down. Then, next to each one, answer: what lesson did it leave me? What virtue could I have trained through this? Perhaps patience, resilience, honesty, courage. Do it with rigor. You will see how what was once a burden becomes a resource. And little by little, your past stops being a prison and becomes a gym of strength. Seneca said, "Difficulty strengthens the mind, as labor does the body." If this is true, then your difficult past is not evidence of inferiority, but proof of your training. Every fall, every disappointment, every mistake is an exercise that prepared you for the life you have now. If you see it this way, your biography stops being a tale of lack and becomes a map of learning. The danger lies in getting stuck in a single reading. "I made a mistake, therefore I am worthless." That phrase destroys, but there is another possible reading. "I made a mistake, therefore I learned." And that phrase builds. The fact is the same. The difference is in your interpretation. Remember this. You cannot change the past, but you can change how you carry it. And the way to do it is to reinterpret it as training. Because every time you do, you take power away from inferiority and give it to virtue. The Stoics invite us not to flee from painful memories, but to face them and ask, "What did you teach me?" That act of courage turns what seemed like an obstacle into a tool, and little by little, your story stops being the proof that you are less and becomes the argument that you are strong. So the next time the voice of inferiority reminds you of your past, answer it. That was not proof that I am worthless. It was training that made me wiser. That answer changes everything, because the past will no longer be dead weight, but a living resource. Ninth Stoic lesson: protect your attention as a sacred asset. Your attention is the most valuable resource you have. On it depends what you believe, what you feel, and ultimately who you are. Where you place your attention, there your life grows. And yet, it is one of the resources we neglect the most. We allow anything to capture it. Social media that compares us, toxic conversations that diminish us, repetitive thoughts that chain us. And then we wonder why we feel inferior, why our mind is exhausted, why we live in constant dissatisfaction. The Stoics were clear on this. The mind must be trained to guard where it places its attention. Marcus Aurelius wrote it as a daily reminder. A man's life is what his thoughts make of it. In other words, your life is the sum of what you decide to look at, listen to, and repeat. If your attention is always on what you lack, on what others achieve, on what you did wrong, you will inevitably feel less. But if your attention is on your progress, your virtues, what is under your control, you will cultivate serenity and strength. Inferiority feeds on comparisons, and comparisons enter through the eyes and ears. It takes only opening a social media app and swiping dozens of seemingly perfect lives displayed before you. Vacations, bodies, achievements, celebrations, and your mind, unfiltered, absorbs this spectacle and turns it into an unfair measure against yourself. You do not compare your real life with that of others. You compare your intimacy with their showcase, and in that game, you always lose. Protecting your attention means actively filtering what you allow into your mind. Just as you care for what you eat to avoid making your body sick, care for what you consume with your senses to avoid making your soul sick. Ask yourself, does this account I follow inspire me or make me feel less? Does this conversation build me up or drain me? Does this mental habit bring me closer to virtue or sink me deeper into comparison? Each answer is an act of protection. Epictetus warned that we are responsible for our judgment, and judgment is born from what we observe and repeat. If every day you surround yourself with stimuli that reinforce the idea that you are less, your mind will take it as truth. But if you choose environments, words, and practices that remind you of your dignity, that will be the truth you cultivate. The environment does not determine your worth, but it influences how you perceive it. That is why the wise carefully design their surroundings. Think of your attention as a garden. If you allow any seed to fall into it, weeds will grow that suffocate what truly matters. But if you consciously choose what to plant, if you pull out what poisons and cultivate what strengthens, your garden will flourish. The same happens with your mind. Where you place attention, there your character grows. The Stoic practice here is concrete. Design routines of mental hygiene, establish digital diets, less time in spaces that fuel comparison, and more time in readings that strengthen your character. Practice productive silences, moments of the day when you choose not to fill your mind with external noise, but to focus on reflection, writing, breathing. Surround yourself with people whose presence reminds you who you are, not those who profit from making you feel small. An example, if you notice that every time you spend time on certain social networks, you end up feeling less, then they are not just platforms of entertainment, they are invisible chains. Protecting your attention would mean reducing that consumption or transforming it into something more conscious, following accounts that inspire you instead of those that compare you. Marcus Aurelius warned that the human mind tends to scatter and lose strength if it is not trained. That is why he repeated to himself, "Keep your attention on what is before you, on what depends on you." That is the key, to bring your gaze back to the present and to your actions. Because every time your attention drifts toward what you cannot control, you feed the sense of inferiority. But every time you bring it back to your sphere of action, you feed serenity. It is also important to understand that protecting your attention does not mean isolating yourself from the world or living in a bubble. It means filtering and directing. Just as a river can overflow and destroy, or be channeled and generate energy, your attention can scatter and ruin your calm, or focus and create strength. You cannot prevent distractions from existing, but you can choose how much space you give them in your life. Take an inventory. What things occupy most of your attention? Negative news that fills you with fear, social comparisons that make you feel less, superficial conversations that drain your energy. Each of these is a drain on your dignity, and as long as you continue to allow them space, you will continue to confirm the belief of inferiority. But if you decide to cut off those leaks and redirect your attention to what truly matters, your discipline, your values, your progress, you will begin to regain serenity. The Stoic does not waste attention on what does not depend on him, not because he is insensitive, but because he understands that attention is a limited resource. Every minute you invest in comparing yourself with someone else is a minute you did not invest in your own improvement. Every word you give to empty conversations is energy you did not dedicate to cultivating your virtue. And every thought you let wander in negativity is strength you did not use to move forward. Remember this, your attention is sacred. It is the filter that defines your inner world. You are not inferior because you lack talents or because others have more. You feel inferior because your attention is fixed on what diminishes you. Move that attention to what strengthens you, and you will see how the narrative changes. The practical challenge is clear. Each day, dedicate a few minutes to writing down where you placed your attention. Evaluate honestly. Did it make me grow, or did it make me compare? Did it give me serenity, or did it steal my peace? Over time, you will begin to notice patterns, and when you see them, you will have the opportunity to redirect. Because inferiority is not sustained by lack of worth, but by an excess of attention to the wrong things. So protect your attention as a sacred asset, because if you control your attention, you control your life. And if you choose to direct it toward virtue instead of comparison, you will break the belief of inferiority at its root. 10th Stoic lesson: measure your life by virtue, not by status. We live in an age where everything seems to be measured in terms of status: who has more followers, who makes more money, who achieves more recognition, who receives more applause. And although those indicators change over time, the feeling they leave is usually the same. It is never enough, because status is like a mirage. When you think you've reached it, it shifts a little further away. There is always someone with more. There is always someone better positioned. There is always someone who seems more successful. If you measure your life with that yardstick, inferiority is inevitable. No matter how much you advance, there will always be a point of reference that makes you feel small. That is why the Stoics rejected the idea of valuing life according to status. For them, the true measure was virtue. Marcus Aurelius, being emperor, the man with the most power in Rome, could have allowed himself to be defined by his position. But in his meditations, he repeated that the only thing that really mattered was whether he acted with justice, with temperance, with wisdom. Not whether he conquered more territories, not whether he accumulated more wealth, not whether he was applauded by the masses. Virtue, not status, was the measure of his life. This lesson is crucial for you, because as long as you continue measuring your worth by the eyes of others, you will live in slavery. Today they will applaud you, tomorrow they will criticize you. Today you will be relevant, Tomorrow, someone else will take your place. If your dignity depends on that back and forth, you will never have peace. But if you measure it by virtue, by your integrity, by your effort, by your coherence, then your worth will be stable. No one will be able to take it away from you. Think about this. Status is external and volatile. Virtue is internal and firm. Status depends on factors outside your control: the market, fashion, the opinion of others. Virtue depends only on you, telling the truth, acting with courage, practicing discipline. Status changes with time. Virtue remains as a guide in any circumstance. Imagine two scenarios. In the first, you get a job promotion, public recognition, constant praise. In the second, no one notices your effort. You receive no awards or applause. In both cases, you can live with dignity if your metric is virtue, because in both you can be just, honest, brave, and consistent. But if your metric is status, then your happiness depends on the external scenario. You will be a slave to life's ups and downs. Inferiority settles in because we use the wrong measure. You are not less because someone else has more visible achievements. You are only less if you abandon your virtue. And you are great, even if no one sees it, if you remain faithful to your principles. That is what the Stoics called true wealth, that of character. Seneca warned that nothing is more miserable than measuring life by the standards of others, because you will always find yourself poor when comparing with someone who has more, and you will always feel insignificant compared to someone who receives more honors. But if you change the question from "what do they have that I don't" to "did I act with virtue today?" the answer is in your hands, and there is no room for inferiority there. Do this exercise. At the end of the day, don't ask yourself if you achieved more than others. Ask yourself if you acted according to virtue. Were you honest? Did you fulfill your duty? Did you show patience where it was easier to explode? Did you practice courage where it was more comfortable to remain silent? If the answer is yes, then your life was great, even if no one applauds it. A life measured by status always generates anxiety. It forces you to run an endless race where you will never reach the finish line. A life measured by virtue generates serenity, because each day you can move forward on your own path. You don't need to surpass anyone, only to be faithful to yourself. Status may give you power, but it cannot give you peace. It may give you recognition, but it cannot give you coherence. It may give you material wealth, but it cannot give you inner freedom. Virtue, on the other hand, can give you all of that without the need for external noise. Remember that what is in your control is not the position you hold in the world, but the quality of your thoughts and your actions. If you choose to measure your life by what you control, you will live free. If you measure it by what you cannot control, you will live enslaved. That is the essential dichotomy. Inferiority dies when you change the metric. When you understand that your worth does not depend on a position, on a comparison, or on recognition. It depends on the consistency with which you live your principles. It depends on virtue. So every time the voice of comparison whispers to you, "They are more than you," respond, "They may have more status, but not more virtue than me if I choose to live with integrity." That answer gives you back your freedom, because no one can take your virtue away from you, and as long as you have that, you are enough. Break the belief. Choose your freedom. We have walked together through an uncomfortable but necessary terrain. The terrain of facing that feeling that has so often stopped you. The belief of being less, of not measuring up, of not being worthy enough. That voice that hides behind your comparisons, your silences, your fear of failure. A voice you may have learned in childhood, at school, in your family, in life's first defeats. A voice that repeats itself so often it already seems yours, when in reality it is only an echo you accepted without questioning. The harshness of this truth is that you are not inferior because the facts say so, but because you have allowed that belief to govern your interpretation of the facts. You were not born with that idea. You learned it. And what is learned can be unlearned. What is repeated can be broken. What becomes a habit can be replaced by another. Throughout these 10 lessons, you have seen that the feeling of inferiority is not a destiny, but a construction. You have learned to identify the root belief, to separate facts from interpretations, to live by the dichotomy of control, to train the discipline of assent. You discovered that you can collect evidence of your strength instead of excuses, that you can let go of comparison and embrace your own standard, that small daily acts of courage matter more than any speech, that your past is not a judge but training, that your attention is a sacred asset to be protected, and above all, that your life must be measured by virtue and not by status. If you think about it, each of these lessons is a strike against the chain of inferiority, and strike after strike, the chain weakens, because inferiority only holds as long as the belief remains intact. But when you face it, when you question it, when you act against it, it begins to lose its power. The world will continue to offer you comparisons, criticism, applause, and rejection. That will not change. What can change is your response, because you now know how to distinguish what is in your hands and what is not. You now know that your worth does not depend on what happens outside, but on what you choose inside. And if you can remember that, no one will ever chain you again with the lie that you are less. Imagine your life if you apply these lessons with consistency. Imagine waking up without the weight of comparison, speaking without the burden of proving something, acting without the constant fear of failing. Imagine looking at your past without shame, but with gratitude for how it trained you. Imagine using your attention to cultivate what strengthens you, not what chains you. Imagine measuring your life not by status, but by virtue. That life is not an impossible dream. It is within your reach. It is in your decision. True strength is not in pretending confidence, but in building it with discipline. It is not in silencing pain, but in transforming it into learning. It is not in collecting applause, but in practicing virtue in silence. True strength is looking within and discovering that you were never inferior. You were simply using the wrong measure. Now it is your time to choose. You can continue measuring your life with the world's yardstick and keep feeling less, or you can change the measure and begin to live with dignity. That decision is yours, and the most powerful part is that no one can make it in your place. Before closing, I want to invite you to something more. If this message resonated with you, don't leave it as a passing reflection. Subscribe to continue walking this Stoic training so that together we build a space where pain is not identity but teacher, where comparison is not a chain but an opportunity to grow, where virtue is the true measure of life. And I want to leave you with a commitment. Don't just listen to it, write it in the comments as a personal declaration. The phrase is simple but powerful. I break the belief of being less. I choose my freedom. Make it your mantra. Repeat it every time the voice of inferiority wants to take root again. Write it down to remind yourself, and so that others may also dare to break their chains. Because what you share not only strengthens you, it also inspires others who, in silence, carry the same weight. The harshness of this truth is that you were never inferior, and the greatness of this path is that now you know it. From today on, you don't need to prove anything to anyone. You only need to live with virtue, with courage, with serenity. Because your worth is not decided by the world, it is decided by you. Your voice is essential here. Every reflection strengthens and elevates our community, reflecting the true value of each individual and contributing to our shared Stoic identity. The reflection that receives the most support will be set as the standard of this community of Stoic minds, a community that does not flee from pain but walks through it with courage, with wisdom, with honor. We will see each other in our next gathering at Stoicism for Winners, where we will continue exploring the riches of Stoic wisdom applied to modern life. Now, take the opportunity to deepen your Stoic practice with new recommended podcast sessions. Follow us so you don't miss any reflection that could help you at just the moment when everything feels overwhelming. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we publish episodes designed to accompany you when life feels heavy, when it's hard to stay calm, when you need a word to remind you who you are. Not following us is to risk missing exactly that lesson that could bring back the peace you have been seeking. Until we meet again, remember, you are the sole owner of your perception, the creator of your peace, and the warrior of your own battle. This is the legacy of Stoicism, the art of being invincible.